Thank you. I call to order the regular meeting of the MWPA Board of Directors of November 16, 2023. I want to acknowledge that Barbara Kohler is online. Hello, Barbara. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Martina, do you want to ask her a question?
Yes, so just informing the board that Director Kohler is attending remotely under a just cause reason under AB 2449. She's currently dealing with a contagious illness, and so that's why Director Kohler is not with us today. Director Kohler, is there anyone in the room with you who is over the age of 18 years old?
No, thank you.
Okay.
Thank
Would you like
you.
for me to proceed with roll?
Yes, please. Thank you.
Perfect. And starting with Bolinas, Director Molesworth.
Here.
For Mill Valley, Director Burke.
Here.
For the City of San Rafael, Director Kurtz.
Here.
For the City of Larkspur, Director Paulson.
Here.
For County of Marin, Director Rodoni.
Here.
For anyone in the room with a device, you'll definitely want to make sure that you are muted on your laptop, tablet. That could be causing feedback, possibly not.
Okie dokie. Director Kohler, did you have a question before we proceed with roll?
Yeah, I couldn't hear. I think your mic was not close enough, but I think I got the gist, but I was just wondering if there was something wrong with the sound. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And so I'll start over with roll. For Bolinas, Director Molesworth.
Here.
For Mill Valley, Director Burke.
Here.
For the City of San Rafael, Director Kurtz.
Here.
For the City of Larkspur, Director Paulson.
Here.
For County of Marin, Director Rodoni.
Here.
For Inverness, Director Donahue.
Here.
For Kentfield, Director Evergettis.
Here.
For Marin Wood, Director Shea.
Here.
For Muir Beach, Director Murray.
Here.
For Novato, Director Goings.
Here.
For Sleepy Hollow, Director Finn.
Here.
For Southern Marin, Director Hilliard. For Stinson Beach, Director White.
Here.
For the Town of Corte Madera, Director Casisa.
Here.
For the Town of Fairfax, Director Kohler.
Here.
For San Anselmo, the Town of San Anselmo, Director Feynman.
Here.
And last but certainly not least, for the Town of Rost, President
Here.
McMillan.
Here. Thank you. Number 3, agenda adjustments. Do board members or staff have any adjustments to the agenda?
President McMillan, if I may, staff recommends the removal of item 10A, the prescribed flyer presentation due to travel arrangements. Chief Martinelli will not be able to make it. And then based on the content that we have in our action items, we recommend switching staff items, which is item 8, or staff reports, which is item 8, with action items, which is item 9. So go to action items first and then staff reports.
Okay, so action items will become 8 and staff reports will become 9.
Correct. And remove item 10A due to travel arrangements for Chief Martinelli.
Great. Any objections to doing that? Great. Number 4, open time for public expression. The public is welcome to address the Board of Directors at this time on matters not on the agenda that are within the jurisdiction of the board. Please be advised that pursuant to Government Code Section 54954.2, the board is not permitted to discuss or take action on any matter not on the agenda. Comments may be no longer than 3 minutes and should be respectful to the community. Please silence your cell phones during the meeting and mute your microphone when not reporting out. Martina, are there public comments?
If there are any members of the public wishing to speak on the current agenda item, the open time for public expression, please raise your hand in the reactions. And for those joining us by phone, please press *9 to raise your hand and *6 to mute and unmute yourself. And there are no hands for comment at this time.
Thank you. Number 5, Executive Officers Report. Executive Officer Mark Brown will provide the staff report on this item.
Good afternoon, everybody. And just a reminder that November is Native American Heritage Month. We were hoping that we were going to align the prescribed fire discussion with Native American Awareness Month, but unfortunately, or Heritage Month, excuse me, unfortunately, that was not possible due to the travel arrangement we already talked about, but we thought there was a great connection between cultural burning, our desire to increase prescribed fire in Native American Heritage Month. But it is a good time to remind us, or to remind the board, that we are looking for an appropriate land acknowledgement for our meetings. And we didn't want to just create a land acknowledgement and check a box. We want to make sure that our land acknowledgement actually means something. So we're doing quite a bit of research so that when we do adopt the land acknowledgement, it is meaningful and thoughtful. Fire season, I think we can start feeling comfortable now. And I'll just leave it at that. Who knows, but I think we can start feeling comfortable. Smart and Connected Communities is a project that we have been partnering with UC Berkeley for several things, but one of them is creating what they call a digital twin to Marin County, so that different types of disasters can be modeled in the digital world and see how they play out in the digital world as opposed to the real world. Part of that is wildfire simulations, obviously, and we want to make a video game with purpose, and it would be surrounding evacuations. And so we're trying to create a very realistic video game simulation that can be played on either computers, mobile devices. We're also working towards a board game, and we are trying to make it very realistic, first of all. Second of all, what we've done is we're creating personas, so people can say, you know what, I'm the mother of 4 with kids in school, and there's a wildfire evacuation. I own horses, there's an evacuation. I live in an apartment, I do not have a vehicle, and there's an evacuation. So you can go through these different personas. And what we're trying to do is reinforce good behavior. And it's also a great environment for us to learn where residents don't make great behavior or great decisions. And if we see a consistent trend of those types of decisions, then we can have a public education campaign that's focused towards that. We did have an opportunity to present with Fire Safe Marin at the Marin County Disaster Preparedness Forum. It was well attended, and I felt it was very well facilitated. Stephen Torrance from Marin County Office of Emergency Management facilitated it, and I felt that the conversation went really well. And Rich Shortall and I partnered with a little presentation going back and forth, and we felt it was quite successful. While fire season is gracefully ending for us, grant season starting for us, and as you saw in the board packet, we do have a $6 million grant that we are requesting for the San Rafael San Anselmo Fuel Reduction Zone. We are also exploring a partnership with One TAM and the Fire Foundry for a Coastal Conservancy grant, and we are researching what aspect of the CAL FIRE fire prevention grant program that we're going to go after. So I just wanted you to know that we're actively pursuing that. The MWPA was requested to participate in an ag and wildfire policy work group, a statewide policy development group that's looking at the intersection of agriculture and wildfire prevention. And I think it's important for the MWPA to be involved in it because, quite frankly, I think a lot of the ranching community in West Marin feels a little bit underrepresented for what is occurring. They're paying their taxes just like everybody else, but then a lot of their practices are improving wildfire prevention. And so we want to find a way that that acknowledgement is made, also that there's credit given towards that, and also driving policies that will help ranchers be able to continue their practices in a way that helps prevent wildfire. And one interesting intersection is ranchers pay for property to graze their animals on. And then we turn around and pay animals to come graze in some of our properties. So there probably is a way to make a little bit of a more efficiency in that. And I'll close out with our citizens oversight recruitment is ongoing. We've received a few applications so far. We're advertising Marin IJ, Marin Post, and the Point Reyes Light. And I'll stop my screen share and take any questions.
Dennis?
Yeah, thank you, Julie. Mark, do you know what areas you're looking for applicants from?
Thank you for asking. Yes, Southern Marin, San Rafael, and fire prevention groups. And that's why we wanted, since fire prevention groups can be anywhere within the county, that's why we targeted the Marin IJ and also the West Point Reyes Light, so we get a good West Marin representation.
Any other questions? I have a question. When does the recruiting for the COC end?
I should have included that. The end of the month, and then we will be asking the board president to create an ad hoc subcommittee to review the applications and make a recommendation to the full board, which we will bring to the board in January.
Great. I think we already have a committee. Bruce?
Yep, Mark, I find that ag and wildfire prevention group really interesting. Can you just a little bit more, are you, is there some practices that you're ready to define and a process and a timeline? Can you just a little bit more about what we might expect here in the coming months?
Well, we've only had one meeting, and that
Okay.
was outlining our personal goals and objectives for that. And for me, the biggest one was acknowledging the benefit that the ranching community provides for wildfire prevention, and ensuring that we don't have unintended consequences to legislation that gets in the way of those ranching practices. The overtime for shepherds with goat and sheep herders is an example of unintended consequences that I hope that we can avoid.
And then a question, I mean, is there some science, some peer reviewed science or publications or data that we have that can kind of guide the work that's done, the potential investments that we make, or are you just in conversation stage right now? Or
We're still in a conversation stage, but I can tell you there is, and we have some of the people who have provided the research as part of that committee.
okay, no, thank you. That's fantastic. I'm fully supportive.
And thank you. And not to belabor that point per se, but being interested in West Marin and the farms, are you going through MALT or any of the nonprofit organizations to get any information, or can we get like a report from you on the communications to be included in an agenda?
Yes,
offering?
yes to all of the above, and also Marin RCD will be included in our.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for the report. Real quick on the beginning of grant season. I think in our September meeting, we were talking about the block grants, I believe AB 348. And if you could say anything about that, because that really piqued my interest in September.
Unfortunately, it did not garner traction, and we are continuing to not have block grants available for us. So we are continuing down the path of individual applications.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else? Martina, can you see if there's any public comment?
Certainly, if there's anyone in the public who wishes to speak on the current agenda item, the executive officer's report, please raise your hand in the reactions. And for those joining us by phone, please press *9 to raise your hand, *6 to unmute yourself to deliver a comment if you have one. And there are no hands for comment.
Thank you. Let's bring this back to the board for any discussion. Anybody have anything else they want to say? Okay, number 6, consent calendar. The opportunity for public comment on consent calendar items will occur prior to the board's discussion of the consent calendar. The board may approve the entire consent calendar with one action. In the alternative, items on the consent calendar may be removed by any board or staff member for separate discussion and vote. I will now take public comment on the consent calendar. Martina?
If there are any members of the public wishing to speak on the current agenda item, the consent calendar, please raise your hand in the reactions or press *9 to raise your hand, *6 to unmute yourself. And there are no hands for comment.
Do any board members wish to pull an item from the consent calendar?
I'll make a motion to move the consent.
Second,
Great. Martina, can you call the roll?
Certainly, and that is a motion by Director Kurtz, seconded by Director Paulson to approve the consent calendar.
Director Goins.
I'm sorry, Director Goins made the second? Oh, apologies. A motion by Director Kurtz, seconded by Director Goins to approve the consent calendar. And starting with Bolinas, Director Molesworth.
Aye.
For Mill Valley, Director Burke.
Aye.
For the City of San Rafael, Director Kurtz.
Aye.
For the City of Larkspur, Director Paulson.
Aye.
For the County of Marin, Director Rodoni.
Here, aye, thank you.
For Inverness, Director Donahue.
Aye.
For
Aye.
Kentfield, Director Evergettis.
Aye.
For Marinewood, Director Shea.
Aye.
For Muir Beach, Director Murray.
Aye.
For Novato, Director Goins.
Aye.
Sleepy Hollow, Director Finn.
Aye.
And for Southern Marin, Director Hilliard is not present with us for this meeting. For Stinson Beach, Director White.
Aye.
For the Town of Corte Madera, Director Casisa.
Aye.
For the Town of Fairfax, Director Kohler.
Aye.
For the Town of San Anselmo, Director Feynman.
Aye.
And for the Town of Ross, President McMillan.
Aye.
And that is a unanimous vote of all in attendance.
Thank you, Martina. Number 7, committee reports. We're hearing from Fire Safe Marin, Rich Shortall, and thank you for agreeing to be continued to this meeting from our October meeting. Hi, Meg. I see you there too. Welcome.
Great, thanks everybody. And I really do appreciate the opportunity to give a little bit longer presentation today. So we appreciate it. What we were hoping to do is go over some of the highlights from our annual report. You can see that we put a lot of work into this report so that we can be as transparent and detailed as possible about our wildfire education projects. We hope you will see that there is a good rate of return on your investment. Our small team does work really hard to produce a high quality public outreach program that will motivate residents to take action to adapt to our wildfire risk. As you see, our format changed a little bit this year. I'm going to turn it over now. Our team, Jen Ghana and Meg McCabe, we're all going to share this report. So I'm going to turn it over to Jen right now to get us started. And Jen is the one responsible for a lot of the work that went into this. So Jen?
Thanks, Rich. I'm going to bounce it over to Meg, who's going to start off with the survey and the ADAPT campaign, and then she'll bring it back to me.
Hi, thank you. I'm Meg McCabe, and it's a real pleasure to present this report to you. We began our fiscal year with looking at where we are and what our residents need to know and be able to do to adapt to wildfire. We pay close attention to the 4 objectives that the MWPA has set out for us. And with that, we were looking for, we never plan or act in a vacuum. And so we commissioned Godby Research team to survey the residents of Marin, and we put out a survey to look at the attitudes, knowledge, and awareness of Marin residents. We had 856 responses to this survey, and we needed only 500 to have a statistically significant sample. So we were very pleased with the response. It represented the full demographics of Marin County in terms of age, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, homeowners, non-homeowners, voters, non-voters. We have the link here in the report, and I encourage everybody to take a look at it. I'll just kind of briefly give a snapshot of some of the main findings. We found that wildfire was the top issue ranked among all respondents, for the first time topping education as one of the most important issues to Marin residents. We also found that there was a high degree of awareness among our residents of the main core messages of personal safety, home hardening, alert Marin, and fire smart landscaping. However, there was a gap between adopting the practices. So we found that we still need a lot of work to do to have people take action in these areas. Another finding was that there was a high degree of trust among local fire and wildfire agencies. And in a ranking order, it basically lined up to the closer to home, the more trust there was. We took this information and we applied it to directing our efforts and our improvements to all of our programming, but in particular to the Adapt to Wildfire campaign. And as many of you remember, our Adapt to Wildfire campaign is our paid advertising campaign that goes out to, that seeks to improve the awareness, the knowledge, and the actions of all Marin residents to lower our risk of wildfire. And in the past year, we made significant enhancements to our creative content. We doubled the reach of our campaign. We streamlined the content and the delivery mechanisms to be more cost efficient. Over the course of the year, we really honed in on 6 actions, 6 themes that we wanted to impress on the residents of Marin, and we targeted these depending upon the message. So the evacuation public service announcements went to all residents of Marin. Instead of 32 million, it should be 3.2 million. So this one really took off. There was a lot of participation in this campaign, and it was highly successful. You can see that the campaign was distributed in videos and in all sorts of digital ads, in print, in the IJ, through e-blasts, and in Spanish and in English. So the way it works is that we target an audience in, for evacuations, we have a more general all residents. For vents and some of the home hardening things, we go to homeowners in zip codes of high risk. So for the evacuations, say, where it gets served out to targeting an audience, and it finds the people wherever they are on the internet. And if a resident has their browser set to Spanish, they receive all of the advertisement in Spanish. So it amounted to about 10% of, between 10 and 12% of all of our ADAPT messaging was received in Spanish. The third advertisement was gutters, and then we were moved over in the spring to spring yard work, and then focused on Zone 0, which we are really continuing on as probably one of the most important things that we can get across to people. And that Zone 0, according to the poll, to our assessment, was one of the areas that our public still needs a lot of education on. They still don't quite get what the zones are all about. And then we concluded the year with a look back at all of the good work of the MWPA, and we highlighted areas of vegetation management, of all the home evaluations, of all the evacuation routes. So it was a way of really getting out into the public view that this is all happening by their tax dollars and from all of you.
I'm gonna take it back. Hi, directors. My name is Jen Gauna, and I'm also very glad to be here to be able to share some highlights with you. Meg covered the Adapt to Wildfire paid portion of the Adapt campaign. What I'd like to share with you is a little bit more about the organic outreach that we're doing through our social media. And the page that you're looking on right now, the snapshot of the calendar on the left-hand side was the media buy for the Adapt campaign. So that was the digital ad buys, the print, etc. The calendar on the right-hand side shows how we coordinate the Adapt campaign within our social media. And when we say social media, we mean like the Facebook and the Instagram and the LinkedIn and the Twitter and our e-newsletter. And the big takeaway on this page on the right is that we meticulously plan and coordinate and make redundant messages to support that Adapt campaign. So the social media allows us to dig deeper into the content. So some of those pages that we were showing you earlier, you may have seen an article or you may have seen a social media post. And so we're posting, I want to say almost every day, but it really allows us to get deeper into the topics where the advertising, where we're seeing that advertising. And then I would also say is that we get critical support from our communication partners that are in cities and towns that help amplify the advertising messages within their within their e-newsletters. And so next I want to jump ahead to some of the work. Actually, before we do that, let's pop here. So very quickly on the e-newsletter and the social media, we have a pretty strong presence. Last year, the fiscal year, was something like 425,000 times posts appeared kind of on these Facebook channels that you see here and in the e-newsletter. And this next page shows you the e-newsletter that's on the left-hand side. We have a pretty significant open rate of 60%, and it keeps inching up. But we do work really hard on trying to improve our e-newsletter, make it really readable and accessible. And we are currently working on increasing that subscription rate because we know it's a popular piece. And then on the right-hand side, I just wanted to show you that the number of posts that we created last year, I think, was around 1,200, which was about a 50% increase. And our engagement stayed about the same, but we were reaching a lot more residents. And when we talk about the engagement, this is residents might be making comments, they might be sharing information. And what we've seen is an uptick in that two-way conversation between the resident engaging on social media and Fire Safe Marin MWP engaging back with them. And a lot of the questions or comments we get, we're finding that they're very specific and technical. So let's jump ahead to some partnerships. So as I was saying a little bit earlier, is that we rely heavily on a lot of partners to help amplify the messaging. And I should first say the way that we define our community partners are really the stakeholders, organizations, agencies, community-based organizations whose missions intersect in some way with prevention and preparedness. And we have about 40 of them that we nurture and we try to work together in different ways. So for example, we might work with Marin community health clinics to do outreach at health hubs. We might work with, let's see here. We might work with, we've got these media partners, KCBS, KWMR, and Marin TV that have been really wonderful partners. KCEDS stepped up in a big way in doing a webinar with us and helping amplify the messaging around getting people out for Ember Stomp. And Marin TV hosts a lot of the webinars that we do. We also work with industry like the Yard Zen organization, that's a landscape design. They worked with us on a collaboration for Ember Stomp. We work with the Marin builders as well, and do some training with the Northern California Landscape group. And Rich, I think I want to pass it to you to talk about Firewise.
Great. So we talked at the beginning about paid advertising, how that reaches, and then Jen covered the organic work we do, and the partnering is just really important to make that work. If I were to leave one takeaway, if all of you go back to your organizations and please encourage them to amplify these messages, really helps. Now I'm going to talk about where we have more direct interaction with people. There are 80 plus Firewise sites in Marin and still growing. There's 2 or 3 coming down the pipeline. They represent about 50,000 people. We engage with them quite a bit. We have regular monthly meetings with them. And then we have 7 things that we want them all to do, from evacuation drills, support the chipper program, work with your local fire department, hold regular meetings, educational outreach, and so forth. We're really stepping up our efforts that year with this program. So we're pretty happy with it, and it's moving along pretty well. And of course, this is, again, closer to where residents are. So when you hear from the person down the street that you know that's a Firewise leader and they send you an email, you're more likely to pay attention to that than if you get one from Rich, right? You don't know who it is. Jen, next. And these are all the resources. So we have a materials, fire safe, people can help themselves. This is our cache where we keep all of our print products and whatnot. So when somebody needs supplies, they can go there and get whatever they need. It's worked really well. People really like it. Next. And then Community Ambassador Program. This started late in the year, so there wasn't too much of it. You've been hearing more about it, and you'll hear more about it. We're up in the last 6 or 7 months, we've done, I think, close to 6,500 engagements. An engagement is where you're actually talking to an individual. It's not as passive as somebody visiting the website, for example. So our ambassadors, which come from 3 groups, Firewise Leaders, the Fire Foundry Program, and the Home Evaluation Program, there's about 16 or 18 people in it. 6 of them speak Spanish. And these are folks who are directly talking one-on-one to people. It's a two-way conversation. We're getting our messaging across, but we're hearing back in a very real way from a lot of people, 6,500. What are the concerns? What are the interests? What can we do to help get them better prepared? Next. And then, of course, Ember Stomp goes without saying. Again, we had close to 5,000 people. We were really happy with that year. We appreciated quite a few board members came to that. Thank you so much for supporting that. I think that was success. Again, direct engagement with a lot of people. Next. And I'll turn this section back over to Jen. You're on mute, Jen.
Thank you. Sorry about that. So just to wrap the report up, is we put a lot of energy and effort towards measuring and evaluating the outreach activities that support MWPA's goals. And we look at a lot of metrics that give us insight and inform how we engage with residents and our strategic partners. And so what we did is we looked at these 4 objectives that we had and try to capture some of the ways that we are supporting the objectives. And one of the things I wanted to call out is that within each of these metric that we have here, there are additional metrics that or different measurements that we look at that helps feedback and inform what we do. So when you get a chance to look at the report, this is a great place that measures some of what we're doing. Rich?
And it's Rich's turn to be muted.
Rich is turn to be muted. Yes, thank you very much. We appreciate the opportunity to do this. It is a small team doing all this work out there. Appreciate the time and support from the MWPA. None of this would happen without Measure C and the MWPA. We really appreciate it, and we work very closely with Mark and the team down there and really enjoy that. And with that, we'd be glad to answer any questions.
Thank you. That was a great report. Board members, questions? Yeah, very impressive. Public comment, Martina.
If there is any member of the public wishing to speak on the current agenda item, the Fire Safe Marin Report and End of Year Report, please raise your hand in the reactions. Or if you're joining by phone, please press *9 to raise your hand and *6 to unmute and mute. And there are no hands for it looks like we have one hand for public comment from a Stephen Keys. I did just want to remind all attendees that comments are limited to 3 minutes each. You will not receive a notification toward the end of that comment speaking time. And Stephen Keys, you should be able to deliver your comment now.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes. Hi, Stephen.
Good, good. All right, thank you. I have been participating with the Community Ambassador program that they set up, I think, starting in May or June. It has been quite busy. Apparently a lot of events around the county want somebody to come and answer questions about wildfire. And sometimes it's crowded, people with kids and they need to move. Kids like to spin the wheel, but they don't want to spend any time there. They want to get the candy or whatever and move on. But when we have a chance to talk with the adults, it's very good conversations. They almost all of them have quite technical questions about home hardening or vegetation management or evacuation, and we get a chance to talk about the chipper days and red flag days and what people need to do, and they almost always go away thanking us for bringing that information to them. So it was a brilliant idea, Rich, and you to do this. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. Anybody else, Martina?
And if there are any additional members of the public wishing to speak at this time, please raise your hand in the reactions or press *9 to raise your hand if you're joining us by phone. And there are no additional hands for comment.
Great. Let's bring this back to the board for any final thoughts, comments. Thank you, Jen and Meg and Rich. That was terrific. Keep up the great work. Thank you. Now we're moving to the new number 8, which is action items. The first action item is the San Rafael San Anselmo Fuel Reduction Zone Project specific analysis. And we're joined by Ann Krelock, who is up on our wall because she's not feeling great. So welcome, Ann. Take it away.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am home to keep my germs to myself. So here and there, I'll be on mute so I can cough. So apologies in advance. I'm wondering if Emily Capello would like to share her screen. Great. So I am joined by Emily Capello with Panorama, as well as Kate Anderson with San Rafael Fire. And the three of us are going to run through several slides here. So get cozy. We're going to be talking about the San Rafael San Anselmo Fuel Reduction Zone project. And this is a really exciting project because this is one of those projects that's really an example of what the MWPA, why we exist. And it's really thinking big, thinking across jurisdictional boundaries, and thinking about multi-partner projects to reduce wildfire risk in Marin County. So we're very excited to talk about this project today. Emily, I'm going to have to ask you to advance slides as we go. So would you mind moving on to the next slide? Great. So this is a project that includes, as I said, a lot of different partners. That includes not only those of us who are here either virtually or in the room, the MWPA, San Rafael Fire Department, our fantastic consultants, Panorama, I would put in there as they put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into all of our projects, including this one. Marin County Fire is also a partner on this project. The town of San Anselmo is another partner on this project. Ross Valley Fire Department, really great partner, and Marin County Open Space District also owns a chunk of land in this project area and is a huge partner for us on this. Today, we're going to go through an overview of the project, why we're taking it on, and what the purpose is. We're going to talk about what the project includes and what it doesn't include. We're going to go through the environmental compliance process, what we did, how we reached out to the public and engaged neighbors and stakeholders, the results of that analysis that we conducted, what the next steps are for this project, and then we'll talk about staff recommendations and board action today. Next slide. So I'm going to take on the first few slides and then I'll pass it off. So I wanted to first take a moment and acknowledge that this project is a bit different than other projects that we've taken on. Typically what we do is we retain 99% of the canopy and do a lot of work in the understory, particularly removing non-native invasive broom and other types of ladder fuels, especially non-native invasive plants in the understory. So this project is a bit different because we're going to be removing quite a few trees. Now here, what we're talking about is eucalyptus trees, Tasmanian blue gum eucalyptus, invasive non-native trees in an area, about 150 acres, give or take, of a project area, not the entire area as eucalyptus trees, but there are thousands of stems of eucalyptus in here. We're not going to be removing all of the eucalyptus in this project area. We're going to be removing a significant number of smaller diameter eucalyptus trees and retaining the big mature eucalyptus trees. These trees were introduced to California in the mid-1800s. They were mostly for ornamental purposes, for timber. Didn't work out so well for timber, but they are still on our landscape. They often have kind of a cultural significance on the landscape, particularly the larger trees. They grow really quickly. They get very big, and they can get to 2/3 of their maturity size within a decade. So when they're mature, they might be 150, 180, 200 feet tall and 4 to 7 feet in diameter. So they're big trees. They also tend to use a lot of water. So in areas where you see eucalyptus trees, you tend to dry up streams or wetlands in those areas. You also tend to have a lower level of biodiversity within eucalyptus stands. There's less evidence in terms of avian biodiversity in eucalyptus being reduced, but there's quite a bit of peer-reviewed literature around arthropods, amphibians, native plants, certainly in eucalyptus groves. But they also provide habitat. So we acknowledge that, especially the larger trees, do provide nesting and roosting habitat for raptors and bats. And in some locations, especially along the coast, they provide some habitat for monarchs for overwintering. That does not occur in this location. It's too far inland, and we've confirmed that this area does not provide habitat for monarchs. Next slide. So as you can see, a eucalyptus forest creates a lot of biomass. So eucalyptus groves are pretty unique. They're very different from a native forest. So you create a ton of biomass that sits on the landscape. There's the bark and the leaves, and they accumulate over time. And in fact, they accumulate at a much higher rate than a native forest, and it doesn't really break down. The same microbes in the soil in Australia don't exist here. So that biomass sits there and dries out and hangs out for quite a while. Next slide. Oh, and that photo was taken within the project area, as is this one. So another thing that makes eucalyptus trees pretty unique is the bark. As you can see, this is one of the trees in the project area. There is a lot of bark being created, and it falls off, it sloughs off the tree, and it accumulates underneath the trees here. It just so happens that the bark and the leaves as well are shaped just about right to carry embers very long distances. In fact, if you take a look at some peer-reviewed literature, the International Journal of Wildland Fire, you will see that they're noting spotting distances of 18 to 22 miles in Australia in eucalyptus-dominated forests. This is a problem. So this is something that we're very well aware of when we're planning and thinking about this project. There's also, in the 1997 California Exotic Pest Plant Council proceedings, they're talking about eucalyptus removal on Angel Island and use the words, this is a quote, eucalyptus forests are, quote, the worst in the world for spreading embers during wildfire events. So these are things that we're taking into account. The MWPA is not designed to eradicate eucalyptus trees from Marin County. We are very well aware of the risk associated with eucalyptus trees. Additionally, we have oils that make the biomass more ignitable, and also it burns at higher intensities compared to California natives. Next slide. This is just a quick comparison. If you take a look at these eucalyptus trees versus a native like coast live oak woodland, you're going to see very different fuel loading. And so you can see the difference in the bark, and you can see the difference in the accumulation of biomass underneath some of these trees. So that's just to give you a little idea of how this project is a bit different from some of the other projects we've taken on in the past. And I'll pass it off to, I think, Kate.
Thank you, Anne. So now that Anne's talked a little bit more about
the project overview and why we want to target a specific species, both in the overstory, which is the eucalyptus, but also in the understory, which is our brooms, which we've seen a lot of the fuel reduction projects that we've done across the county already. I want to talk a little bit more about why we chose this specific area with the eucalyptus, and a little bit more about the overall project planning that we've done. So we're here today to approve the formal planning process that we've gone through to this point. That's the CEQA documentation and the analysis that we've done. But planning of this project started much before that. It's been in the process for a couple years now with the MWPA, but I'm sure there's been talks about this area for years beforehand. We started this process forming partnerships with the different agencies and the landowners within the project area, and an analysis of the proximity to our residences, to our communities, and the multi-jurisdictional benefits to providing a project in this specific area between San Rafael and San Anselmo. And through that planning process, both the informal ahead to the more formal planning process, we've developed a lot of objectives that meet everybody's land management goals. The objectives that we've come up with are to reduce the wildfire risk by removing non-native eucalyptus trees, but also broom in the understory. To restore native habitat by thinning the smaller eucalyptus trees, to essentially release the mosaic of retained oaks, the grasslands, and other native vegetation that's already present on the site. We'll be doing that by doing a selective removal of eucalyptus. This is not a clear cut. We'll be selective about what we are removing. And the goals are also to reduce the overall acreage of eucalyptus stands in the project area. We want to open up gaps where we can for native vegetation to reestablish and flourish where it already is. And then the remaining eucalyptus trees that we'll keep on site, mostly those larger diameter already really established, will be maintained in a way to reduce the contribution to the fire risk. And we can see a really good example of that up on the top of the ridge, where Marin County Open Space District has already put in decades of work to create essentially a demonstration of what we think the rest of the site can be as well. Next slide, Emily. So I want to talk a little bit about the location of this project. As I previously mentioned, this is right in the junction of multiple jurisdictions between communities of San Rafael to the north in Terra Linda, but also to the west or to the east, and then San Anselmo to the more south and the west of the project. As well as being between jurisdictions, there's also multiple ownerships right in this one spot. We have Marin County Open Space on the top of the ridge. That's where we've already seen a lot of work. And then moving down the slope towards San Anselmo and Sir Francis Drake Boulevard, we move through the Mount Tamalpais Cemetery, through the town in San Anselmo, and then other private lands owned by the Cedars. Next slide, Emily. So we are fortunate enough to get some drone footage of the project just to give more context. And what we can see to the right is Terra Linda and San Rafael moving over to the top of the ridge over the native landscape that's been conserved into the project area. Starting at the top of the ridge, we can really see the eucalyptus groves start to appear on the screen. And what we can tell moving down this southern facing slope that is typically drier are some pretty dried out trees. And we can see different densities of the eucalyptus here. Definitely more dense, more towards San Anselmo, pockets where there's been treatment that are a little bit less dense. And we can also see the evacuation challenges associated with this project area. Out to the west, kind of on the top of the screen, we can see these one way in, one way out access and evacuation routes, which present a challenge if this were to experience a fire. And then as we move through, we can still see a lot of the native vegetation, which is more of what we want to try to incorporate into this project. That's been really well maintained within Sorge Park in the town in San Anselmo, and provides a goal for us to achieve as well. So we've ended there. Next slide, Emily. So beginning any project like this, we can see it's large and it's complicated. There's a lot of moving parts. There's a lot of partnerships to develop. But when we get down to the real planning, any forest management project should probably start with knowing what's on the ground. And the best way for us to do that with this project to reinforce what we can see in these dense stands is to perform a forest inventory. So we were able to hire a forester to come in, and first they broke up the whole project area both by ownership. We wanted to keep Marin County Park separate because they have a lot of specific management objectives. And then we kept the other part, which includes the cemetery and other lands, and another batch down there. And so once we've broken it by ownership, we've also broken it up by the densities of the fuel on the site. So we're able to stratify into 4 different stratum, both of which include a high density eucalyptus and a low density eucalyptus area. So through that, we were able to really see what's on the ground and the metrics behind that, kind of corroborate what we already know. And proceed with deciding and creating informed decisions about how many trees we're going to cut, where we want to apply the treatment, and be able to provide the public with more detailed metrics of what we want to achieve. Aside from the eucalyptus removal, we also want to reinforce the defensible space part of this project. Although this is moving beyond the 100-foot zone that we typically think of as the defensible space zone, we do want to acknowledge and treat specifically the areas around our communities that are within 100 feet of the project area. So they'll be receiving very similar prescription to what we see in a lot of other fuel reduction projects that we've been doing. Most specifically, one that runs right into this project being the Greater Ross Valley Shaded Fuel Break. Next slide, Emily. As I just mentioned, and as we're able to see, this project's large and it's going to require phasing. This is not a project to approach all at once. And so breaking it down into 2 separate phases based on the size of the trees that we want to remove was crucial. Phase 1 of the project, which we are hoping to start within the next fiscal year, or maybe even the next calendar year, will involve the thinning, not the complete removal of the stand, but the thinning of all non-native eucalyptus stems up to a 10-inch diameter limit. That's hard to conceptualize, but if we think of a basketball, it's around the same diameter as a basketball. So if you can visualize that up to every tree. And what we see on the top right of the screen is really what we want to target here. We can see a few larger diameter trees, but filled in with a lot of those smaller diameter. And that's really what we're focusing on here, to open up that understory and provide that growing space for native vegetation. Already mentioned the defensible space treatments that'll happen. We want to accomplish these in phase 1 to really bolster that protection for our residences. And we're also retaining the option to remove larger trees in the 11 to 15-inch diameter range based on the feasibility, if they're close to roads, and where slopes allow. And if there's the opportunity to open up slopes or open up areas a little bit more, we will definitely try to do that. Through this whole process, and I didn't mention this as part of the inventory, we did take stock of the native vegetation, the oaks, the bays, other native trees that are already on site. And through this process, we're we will be retaining all of our native vegetation and focusing treatments where we know that we have established trees. We'll be using existing roads. There's no new roads being built into this project. We're fortunate enough to have pretty good access throughout most of the project area. So we won't be having to expand upon that, and using that will really help us access more. And then as we saw in some of the photos that Ann showed, there will be a huge component of the removal of built up bark and leaves in that understory just to get to these trees. We'll talk a little bit more about how we plan to dispose of that in future slides. Next slide, Emily. So getting into the specifics of the treatment methods, we're planning this process through the California Vegetation Treatment Program. We'll talk more about what that is and what that entails. But all of our treatments will be in line and limited to what is allowable in this CEQA vehicle, let's say. So we'll have a lot of erosion control methods in place. As we saw in that flyover, we have a lot of steep slopes. We have a lot of geology to be aware of. And our treatments will be tailored around that. We might have to avoid some areas or be more careful in areas where the slopes are more limiting. But we'll be doing a lot of manual treatment, and that's what we've seen on other fuel reduction projects around the county. That's typically hand thinning with chainsaws or even loppers if it's feasible. This is really what our hand crews are able to do. Part of the manual treatment is herbicide application, which we'll talk more in detail about. And then vegetation planting, which is not probably part of phase one, but more the restoration piece of this project that we're aspiring to. We'll be needing to do mechanical treatments as well because of the size and scope. Crews with chainsaws are not going to be enough to achieve what we want here. It's also reducing the risk to personnel in the field by using mechanical methods. A lot of these you might be familiar with already. We're already using them on smaller scales on our other projects. That includes mastication. This is mulching. We can see that in the lower left photo. This is what we've typically been using on our fire roads, and it's a really efficient way to reduce a lot of the fuel loads down to the ground quickly. We'll also be doing chipping as well as cutting using what we can see in the upper right, which might be a feller buncher, cut to length harvesters, or typical logging equipment, which reduces the need for personnel to be in the area to cut down larger trees and provides for their safety a little bit more. To move these trees around, we see that there's a lot of stems. We'll also be implementing other methods to skid and forward this material to an area where we'll be doing biomass disposal. Next slide, Emily. So I mentioned herbicide treatment. I know that's a real topic of what we're talking about today, and we'll go into depth more. But this project won't be feasible without very targeted application of herbicide. Herbicides are allowed under the Cal VTP, and we'll be following those regulations very closely to make sure that we're within scope. Herbicide is used throughout the county. It's a tool that we'll need to make sure that the maintenance of this project is feasible. And we're focusing on using Garlon 4 for eucalyptus. It's proven to be very effective both on eucalyptus and broom. And the way that we do that to minimize any release into the air, into the soil, into the waterways, is that we'll be painting it directly onto the living part of the tree immediately after cutting. It's a very targeted application. We're not covering the entire stump because we don't need to. Focusing on applying the herbicide to the outer portion of the tree is really where it will draw in that herbicide quickly, especially if we do it at the right time of year where the trees are drawing down their nutrients, and that expedites the effectiveness of this treatment. Because Garlon 4 isn't as effective as glyphosate, there may need to be follow-up treatment as needed. It is effective, but we do need to maintain any sprouts that are coming up. So we'll have to be diligent about that. And this is to say all of these things are applied under the recommended prescription from a licensed pest control advisor. I am not one, which is why we're seeking outside consultation. That'll be part of this project. And they provide a very specific recommendation for the target species, the environmental hazards taken into consideration, weather restrictions that include the right time of year with the temperature, the wind, the precipitation. We won't be applying on really hot days, and we won't be applying when we know that there's rain in the forecast. There's also other site restrictions and resource buffers factored into this. This could be waterways, sensitive soils, any biological resources that are found on site as well. Slide. So just a little bit more about herbicides, just to drive this point home. We've got a list of the project-specific analysis limitations for herbicides. I'm not going to read through all of them, but you've all received a copy of our PSA. So I just want to emphasize that we're following these very closely and minimizing any exposures. Next slide, Emily. So just a little bit more about why herbicide. Eucalyptus are uniquely persistent after they're cut. We can see this on the photos to the right. Both of these areas cut eucalyptus without using any follow-up treatment. And what we've seen here just in the last 24 months of the photo on the right, this is from City of San Rafael lands. We've had some pretty prolific resprouting, and those sprouts up from that one stump, I can count about 4 or 5 right there, are anywhere between 2 and 4 inches in diameter already. And so the maintenance of this project is going to be near to impossible without the tool of herbicide. What we can see also within the project area, this is where the Greater Ross Valley shaded field break ran into what we are now including in this project. Is a pretty prolific sprouting of eucalyptus as well. This is within the last 12 or so months. So just an illustration of why we need this tool. Right within San Rafael, we've got a couple examples. And herbicides also recommended by the California Invasive Plant Council. And it's also been really effective for other land management agencies and their eucalyptus removal projects around the Bay Area. Next slide, Emily. So I talked a little bit about biomass disposal. We're going to be removing a lot of trees and trying to find innovative ways to reduce the amount of material that we haul off-site is one of our main goals with this project. We don't want to turn San Anselmo and San Rafael into hauling routes with this project. That's not our goal. We want to minimize that as much as possible. So looking into other ways to dispose of this material in a way that sequesters carbon, reduces the emissions through hauling, is one of the things that we're seeking. We've been able to do this with pile burning on previous projects. In the top left photo, this is one of our defensible space fuel reduction projects through Marin County open space lands that was done in, I believe, April of last year. Time's going by pretty fast. But we're able to use pile burning very effectively close to homes under the supervision of firefighters in a really safe way, which, depending on the slope and the access for firefighters to bring in water, might be used here. But we want to look past that into other ways to produce biochar and to sequester more of the carbon that we're going to be producing on site. And this can be done a few different ways. What we see in the 2 photos on the right are different methods of that. One is a little bit more basic and one is a little bit more technologically advanced. On the top right, we see an air curtain burner. There's many different iterations of how these are being manufactured and produced. But it's essentially a contained box that will, through an airfoil over the top, really condense down the the burning of the material in a way that it's not emitted as much into the air, but retained down and combusted completely into biochar or into ash that can then be spread onto the site and retained on the site as well. On the bottom right is a more primitive, but not lesser than way to do this. This is a kiln. It's open bottomed and is essentially couple slats of metal put together, and the way that this is lit and that this burns reduces the material down to about 2% of what we put into it, and retains that biochar on site, and that can be spread. So this is a carbon negative tool that we can use. And then in the bottom left, this might become a little bit more familiar to people who've seen our fuel reduction projects. This is a masticator. It's another way to keep material on site, but it's just the modification of that fuel. It's essentially the chewing up of the material into smaller parts to be left on site to decompose with the appropriate moisture content. And then we also have chipping and broadcasting. We'd like to do less of that. And then chipping and hauling, which we're also trying to reduce as well. Next slide, Emily. So after phase 1, we want to have a phase 2. This will start with another forest inventory to really see what's still left when we complete phase 1. So this will be looking at the larger diameter trees and a more selective cut. As we see what's still there, we see where the native trees are, we see where we might want to plant, where it might be feasible to introduce more native trees and more native plants. And focus our attention on those areas. We'll be looking at areas based on the slopes, the aspects, and where we can feasibly and fiscally responsibly remove trees. These cut stumps will stay in place, both for erosion control and the minimization of soil disturbance. We don't want to go in and grind stumps. That's pretty hard on the landscape, and it's not required. And then we also, just to bring it back to that reference I made to the work that Marin County Open Space has done, we want to retain those larger trees in place. They provide significant habitat. They provide shade and a sense of place to a lot of the residents that this place is special to. So we also want to consider that as, after the fire risk has been mitigated in the understory. And then phase 2 also includes all the maintenance of what we've done. As I mentioned, there's going to be a lot of detection and surveying and maintenance that will go into this project. Next slide. Finishing with the project maintenance. I think I've hammered this home at this point, but it's crucial. Without maintenance and forward thinking about how we're going to maintain the risk that we've mitigated, we wouldn't even have started. This will require a longer term vision, increased funding over the years, and it's really crucial with all the tools that we've already mentioned to maintain the risk that we've mitigated at this point. I've talked a lot about what we're going to remove, but we also want to talk about what we're going to add in. And this is where that restoration planting really comes in. Project maintenance also might include erosion control measures as well. Those might be longer term, but we want to account for that. Next slide. And I think we're on into our CEQA documentation.
Thanks so much, Kate. I'm just going to take the next 2 slides and dive into the California Vegetation Treatment Program just a little bit. The board has heard a little bit about the CalVTP previously. This is our 3rd time tearing off the CalVTP program EIR that exists. So we'll just provide a quick overview, and then we'll dive into a bit more about the environmental compliance process and the findings. In 2019, the Board of Forestry approved the California Vegetation Treatment Program as a statewide program to try to increase the pace and scale of all this work taking place across the state. It was a very big undertaking. Many years went into this process. And then at the same time, they certified a final programmatic level EIR, Environmental Impact Report, for that program. And that EIR is meant to be a streamlining process for those of us who are project proponents under this program. So various agencies all around the state are using this program level EIR to help streamline our environmental compliance processes. So that's what we've done here. This is the third time that we've used this EIR. So we have prepared a project-specific analysis and addendum under this EIR. So that's what we're going to present today. Next slide. So just, I'm not going to go through everything on this slide, but just a quick overview of some of the terminology and kind of concepts behind this type of review. So the California Vegetation Treatment Program applies to what's called the treatable landscape. So the Board of Forestry really went through and mapped treatable areas that should be covered underneath this program. Generally, that's state responsibility areas. And if you're within that, just within the treatable landscape, you would prepare a PSA, a project-specific analysis. Now, they also realized that their mapping of the treatable landscape was pretty chunky. There are a lot of areas of adjacent lands that really should fall within the treatable landscape, but don't quite according to their maps. So where your project overlaps the adjacent areas, you would just prepare what's called a PSA and addendum, or project-specific analysis and addendum. So that's what we've done for all three of the projects that we've used this for, and that's what a lot of project proponents all around the state do. Skipping down to the standard project requirements and mitigation measures, generally what you do, because there's an existing EIR out there that you're using, is you look at kind of a menu of requirements for projects that want to use this program. So standard project requirements, there are 70 of them included in the CalVTP program. And you just incorporate all the ones that apply to your project. So it's like a menu of best management practices, and you just use all of the ones that apply to you. And then that's the same with the mitigation measures. So there are 21 mitigation measures in that overall program, and you just use any of those that apply to your project. And then you need to think about whether or not the scope of your potential impacts are covered within the CalVTP program. And then if that's not the case, then you need to be thinking a little bit bigger than the CalVTP. For us, we believe that the environmental impacts that we're looking at, you know, all of that analysis that we're looking at for this project really fall within the scope of the California Vegetation Treatment Program. And so we think that our finding is that our project is within the scope of the CalVTP. And then I'll hand it over to Emily.
Thank you. Can folks hear me?
Yes.
Great. So as Anne mentioned, the first thing we did when we were looking at this project was to consider whether it fell within the scope of the CalVTP, and we determined that it did and that we could use it. And so then we started to prepare our PSA, which is on the MWPA website and has been provided to the board. And we did include, as Anne mentioned, an addendum for areas, both areas outside of the treatable landscape, because there was some areas outside and some areas inside, but we also included an addendum for the biochar options because they were not included in the original CalVTP EIR. So we needed to make sure that we considered them and included it in our analysis. I do want to mention that since the original EIR, which was only completed in 2019, the CalVTP has put out a white paper on the importance and the option of including other biochar options. So the CalVTP itself, that process recognizes that this is a good thing to include and notes that you can include it as an addendum. And then once we considered all of our treatment, and the areas inside and outside of our landscape and our different biochar options, We then looked through each of the impacts to determine whether or not they were within the scope of the EIR, and then selected the mitigation measures and the standard project requirements. In order to do that, we had to do some additional research, and that included doing a biological resources desktop review, but we also did reconnaissance surveys, got some of our bio team out into the field to be able to look on the ground and make sure that what was being seen on the desktop was appropriate. And then in order to kind of think ahead and plan for implementation, we knew that there would be the need for some botanical protocol level surveys. And noting that we wanted to make sure that we were meeting the appropriate timeframes, we got biologists out this year. They did 3 site visits during the appropriate seasons for all the different potential blooming species in order to be able to kick off implementation as soon as was needed. And during those 3 site visits, they did not find any sensitive botanical species. We also did a cultural resources record search and did some outreach to the Native American tribes. Those are also per SPRs in the Cal VTP EIR. Based on that sort of record search and the outreach, we decided to go out and do some cultural surveys. Again, looking forward to implementation. It's not required for the PSA, but because we did find some sensitive areas, we're in the process of doing some cultural surveys in order to make sure that we take that into consideration during implementation. And then for the PSA as well, we did slope and stability work in order to make sure that we were taking that into consideration with any of the treatments. And based on that desktop review, we, again, thinking about implementation, have gotten a geologist out into the field to do a field assessment and make sure not only that we're taking the slope into consideration, but also any potential landslides or anything else that might cause instability when implementation is actually happening. So all of those activities have either already been completed or are in the process of being completed. When we do the PSA, we do find that there will be some impacts and that we need to incorporate a fair amount of the standard project requirements for these impacts. The ones you see here, I'm not going to read through all of them, but they do include things like the surveys that I talked about for botanical species, as well as training and just doing desktop surveys as well. So all of that we completed. The one that I would like to just spend a moment on is nesting birds and raptors. We do know that this area has some raptors that do use it for nesting, as Anne already mentioned. And so we just wanted to point out that there is an SPR specific to nesting birds that first says, if possible, avoid nesting season. If not, you are required to do a nesting bird survey. And then depending on what's found, you either need to create some buffers, change potentially the treatments that you're using during that time frame, or delay your treatment. So we were very aware of that and are taking that into consideration when thinking about implementation. The next thing that I just wanted to point out was geology and erosion, because as Kate mentioned, there are some steep slopes in this area. We will be making sure to keep in mind all of the SPRs regarding geology and erosion. That includes limiting work during precipitation events, making sure that you're aware of the steep slopes and what's allowed in different slope categories. And then just doing a lot of different activities to minimize erosion, including minimizing your burn pile size. So we'll have all of those at the forefront when we actually get out and do the work in the field. I also wanted to highlight just briefly air quality and greenhouse gas. Again, this work does include some element of air quality emissions as well as greenhouse gas emissions based on just the vegetation work that you have to do. But we would be complying with all of the air regulations, including for any applicable air permits. And that also includes sort of any open burn regulations, which the Bay Area Air Quality Management District does specifically call out the open burn regulation. It calls out air curtain burners or other types of burning, so not just pile burning. So we'll be sure to keep that in mind when we're implementing the work. I already mentioned that we are using some of the or hope to use, I should say, the alternate biomass treatments. One of the really interesting things about that white paper that the Cal VTP put out, which I had mentioned, is that it does sort of highlight how these treatments, the biomass treatments, can really reduce the amount of air emissions that happen for the treatments compared to pile burning, as well as the greenhouse gas emission. There's really a pretty significant reduction when you use some of the different types of biomass treatments. And so that's something that's highlighted in the PSA as well. And then another thing that Kate also just, I think, spoke of briefly is that depending on the type of biomass treatment that you use, some of them can be considered carbon neutral or even carbon negative because of the way that they burn the vegetation. And then I'm gonna, hit on one last time that another thing that's really important in the PSA and that we are thinking about is the use of hazardous materials and including herbicides. So there's a fair number of SPRs that speak to herbicide use specifically, including no use of herbicides during precipitation, preparing a spill prevention and response plan, making sure you have all of the licenses and permits for them, minimizing herbicide drift, protecting non-target vegetation. So there's a host of different tools that we will need to keep in mind when herbicide is being used. So that's certainly something that we will be checking the box whenever they're being used as part of the project. An additional item that we wanted to mention is that while public outreach is not required under the CalVTP, the MWPA and its partners did conduct extensive outreach for this project. They hosted a meeting with the FireWise community members and key stakeholders. They then held a public information meeting mid-August. We sent out 336 invitations to nearby neighbors. For some of our other PSA projects, we've kind of used a 300-foot buffer around these linear projects to make sure that we're trying to really invite all of the nearby neighbors to come. In this case, we actually reached out to the city of San Anselmo and some of the other FireWise communities and expanded that buffer in order to really capture any of the nearby neighbors who might be interested in finding out about this project. Centerville Fire also put up signs along nearby open space trails to make sure that we were just inviting anybody who uses the area. There are some folks who said they use it on a daily basis, and we wanted to make sure that they were aware of what was happening. We also put a lot of information on websites and the social media, and then sent emails to various listservs to just try to capture as many interested parties as possible. After the public informational meeting, we then had a public site visit, and we had about 40 participants, all different, a lot of neighbors, but also people from further away who came and did both a bit of a talk and then also just walked through the site with us. And I know that we're sort of hoping to have at least one more in the future. Then we've also just hosted a lot of detailed discussions with environmental stakeholders. We had 3 different ones. And those include the California Native Plant Society, Marine Conservation League, Marin Audubon, Sierra Club. A lot of different environmental groups were invited to participate in those. Any of the documents, the maps, our frequently asked questions, our presentations, and the recording of the presentations have all been posted on MWPA's website so that if anybody wasn't able to come, they are able to see or hear what we've been doing. And then also not required is our early posting of the PSA and the addendum, but we do like to get it out there and give everybody an opportunity to read through it and see what the CEQA document says for this project. We have received 4 comment letters on the PSA. I just want to kind of highlight a couple of items. We did hear about some concern about the use of herbicides and concern about the removal of some trees. There was concern about loss of carbon sequestration and that the area gets used by raptors and could potentially be used by monarch butterflies. We also had a couple of letters with support for the project and noting that under certain circumstances, and this project is one of those, herbicide can be an appropriate tool for use and should be guided by the principles of integrated pest management. And then also some support for removal of the eucalyptus within the project site as it's appropriate and then meets the goals of reducing or eliminating fire danger. So I'm not going to get into the responses to those public comment letters, but there is, as part of the board package, a pretty in-depth response to the letters that we received. And then we've also tried to touch on most of those themes throughout this presentation. So I'm just going to read the findings of the CEQA document. After the review, the findings agree with the conclusions of the PSA and the addendum that most impacts would have a less than significant or no impact. Some impacts to archaeological, historical, and tribal resources, biological resources, hazardous materials, public health and safety, and transportation implemented mitigation measures to reduce the impacts to a less than significant impact. And then some air quality and greenhouse gas impacts could potentially have significant unavoidable impacts. The MWPA concurs with the Board of Forestry's judgment of the CalVTP PEIR that the benefits of the project outweigh the potential unavoidable significant impacts. I'm now going to pass it back to Kate to talk a little bit about implementation.
Been talking a lot about the planning process, which brings us to the natural next step of actually getting boots on the ground and implementing this project. We've talked a lot about phasing. Phase 1 and the implementation of that will depend a lot on the funding sources we're able to secure. We have core funding allocated through the San Rafael Core Zone to start this process. We're hoping to do that before the next fiscal year start. Following that, we'll get to it in the funding, but we're looking at outside sources to fund the rest of the implementation because it will be costly. The timing also dependent on the funding and when we're able to secure that. But there's a seasonality component to this as well. Winter work is typically not the time to start large-scale tree removal. So we'll probably be starting with smaller areas of broom pulling and more of that smaller hand crew work as early next year. Tree work, because of the scope and the size and the complexities of that, will start in the drier season later in that year, and also taking into account nesting bird season and any limitations associated with that. As mentioned, we do have funding available now through the Corps, but we'll be putting in for more core funding on an annual basis to support this project. And then also looking outside of the MWPA and our immediate funding for external grants. We have already applied for a U.S. Forest Service Community Wildfire Defense Grant that's been submitted this month. And then there are other opportunities through CAL FIRE with their wildfire prevention grants, might be the most appropriate for this project, which are now open, but we have not applied for yet. Slide him.
All right, so the marathon of slides is just about finishing up here. This is the last slide. And this really brings us back to what we're doing here today and the role of our board of directors here today. And that is to see if you would agree with us that this project falls within the scope of the CalVTP program, and adopt a resolution that's within your board packet, making certain findings of fact, adopting a statement of overriding considerations that indeed this project is important enough to, given all of the things that we talked about, to go ahead and approve and implement it. Approve a mitigation monitoring and reporting plan. And that is really to make sure that we do all of the things that we say we're going to do in our environmental compliance document. And then approve the project itself. And so that's why we're here today. And we're very happy to answer any questions that you might have. Thanks so much for listening to our long and detailed presentation.
Thank you, all of you. That was an incredible presentation with so much information and detail. Mark, do you have something to add?
I do, and I'm going to point out the obvious, and that is the glaring talent of this team that put together the package and the research and the analysis. Kate and Panorama, the whole team at Panorama, phenomenal. I do want to talk a little bit about the project itself, its location, and eucalyptus trees. Not all eucalyptus forests are the same. And I don't think that eucalyptus trees are the fire risk that a lot of people do, but there is a significant fire risk to eucalyptus trees. And what concerns me about this location is the combination of terrain, the slope, the drainages, the density of the forest, the debris on the forest floor here, and proximity to homes. And this location is a concern on an average fire day. It's a concern on an offshore day where all that debris that you saw can easily fly into the middle of the watershed, let alone into the middle of the Ross Valley, into the middle of Miracle Mile. And then on the dry onshore days, it'll push right into the neighborhoods below Ridgewood and Elizabeth Way. So I definitely do not recommend this intensity of projects for all eucalyptus projects that we embark upon. And then I also want to note that if any use of herbicides by the MWPA is a very thoughtful process. We don't go there as the easy button. We only do it if that is proven to be the only way that we're going to succeed. And we don't want to throw bad money after good and throw a large amount of money into the work and find it not to be successful. We need to work with the tools that are the most appropriate and make it successful. And I'll use what was in the report that Ann's team worked on was of the Greater Ross Valley Shaded Fuel Break. The polygons that we used herbicide in was 1% of the project space, but that's actually not the entire polygon where it was used. It was another small single-digit percentage within that 1%. So you could tell that when we do embark upon herbicides, it's through a very thoughtful and judicious process. And with that, I'll stop.
Questions from the board? Tom.
I have two questions. The first has to do with user groups, and the second has to do with the secondary goal of restoration. I'm familiar with the project area, and I have seen personally signs of intermittent camping in the area. In fact, on the perimeter of the project toward Red Hill in San Anselmo, it's a relatively well-known spot for campers. Is there anything? There's no SPR for that, and I'm not sure whether anything needs to be done about that.
And do you have this one?
I was going to actually invite you to speak to this because some of the member agencies have really been working on this issue and using some MWPA funds to think through how to reduce ignitions with some of these populations. Kate, do you want to address that? I know that's been a big one in San Rafael.
Yeah, so the city of San Rafael has invested some of our local monies into the funding of open space rangers for our city of San Rafael lands, as well as any lands adjacent to the city of San Rafael where it makes sense for patrols to happen. It's been proven to help reduce our ignitions in the areas where we historically and annually typically have them. That's just one option that San Rafael has implemented. And I know that there's been a lot of interest around that for other jurisdictions as well.
Yeah, I don't know that I'd call them user groups, but it's just the fact that there are people up there occasionally, and I've personally seen it. The second question has to do with leaving behind a healthy number of 11 to 15 inch DBH eucalyptus, which I think is a great idea, but there's such ferocious competitors for water that won't that inhibit the chances of restoration beneath them? If they grow so rapidly and they're left in place, what chance does native vegetation have to reestablish itself there?
That's a great question. The trees that we want to leave in place are in areas where it's either not feasible to reach them, where the slope limitations inhibit that, where it's far from the roads, where the fire risk is essentially mitigated. And if there are still a large number of those trees in place, we'll be hoping to focus restoration efforts on a more concentrated basis in more accessible areas where we can remove larger amounts of trees to increase that growing space that's more conducive.
if it works as planned, ultimately we get a restored forest floor with native vegetation. Might those 11 to 15-inch eucalyptus then be removed and renativize the entire area, and leaving only the anchor majestic eucalyptus in place?
Yeah, until we start working within the area and selectively removing those mid-range trees, I don't know specifically where each of them are. We haven't done a complete stem mapping, but it's not going to be feasible to remove all of them, which is why we want to focus efforts where we can do more impactful restoration in more accessible areas. And I also want to make this really clear that this project is not a clear cut of eucalyptus. We won't be able to reach all of them from a financial standpoint, a feasibility standpoint on the ground. And once we reach our objectives from a public safety standpoint and an ecological standpoint, we don't want to proceed further.
Thank you.
And
We support the project.
And just to tack on to what Kate already articulated so well, the trees that we plan on leaving in place, and there are a lot of them, will be maintained. They will still continue to create a lot of depth, a lot of bark, but it'll be more feasible to maintain that number of trees than it is to maintain the number of trees that are there now, which are many thousands. So that's the idea, leave some of the trees in place and then maintain them better so that a surface fire is less likely to end up in a crown fire.
Barbara.
Yes, thank you. So I'd asked a couple questions beforehand, and I know there was some of that was touched on. So you have a lot of reliance on air curtain burners, incinerators, or carbonators, or kiln burners. I'm sorry, not incinerators. And based on my reading of the PSA addendum, and I can't say I read every page because it was 441 pages, but I did read quite a bit of it. I don't see in your document, and those are not, none of that is GHG neutral or negative. They have less greenhouse gas emissions and less criteria air pollutants than open burning or pile burning. So it's better than pile burning, which I know the Cal VTP looked at. But what I didn't see is exactly how you would deal with those units. I know that the Air District has no specific permitting, but they do deal with it under Regulation 5 open burning. And what I don't know is, because the tables didn't include any discussion at all of those, what it talked about pile burning and smoke management plans, is how specifically will you address those? Will they be a part of your smoke management plans that you turn into the Air District? I didn't see that in the table.
It isn't called out specifically in the table, but we did go back and look at the open burn regulation 5, and it specifically calls out air curtain burners. It's in the very first page when they define what this regulation is for. It also says that it's for any other type of open burns, and they specifically call out air curtain and kiln and other of those type. So it would be required under those permits.
So when you turn in your smoke management plan for these areas, will you specifically call out that you will be using, for example, an air curtain burner, and how that will be addressed in your smoke management plan, which is what is required under Reg 5?
I imagine so. I mean, first, I think we included all of these as options, and then if and when they are found and we're able to use them, then they would be part of the burn plan. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. And then one other question. I think Tom was talking about the eucalyptus, and I heard Kate say that it's not feasible to remove them all, nor would we necessarily want that. but they do have allelopathic chemicals that they elicit, so nothing can really grow under their understory. Is there anything that we can do when we take those trees out to remove what's in that sort of understory? Maybe removing the duff does that, but they do elicit allelopathic chemicals, which were also talked about in the PSA addendum. Is there anything we can do there or not?
Beyond removing the duff, I don't know that we're gonna because we're not gonna remove the soils along with it. We are keeping a close eye. There is a eucalyptus removal project that's happening in Nevada right now, and that is also including planting some native trees. And so we're keeping a close eye on how well they're doing, with the idea of seeing if anything more might be needed.
Okay, thank you very much, and support the project and appreciate all the materials as well as the responses to the comments that came in. They're really helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. And I'll just add a couple of comments here. One, we have a really great relationship with the Bay Area Air Quality Management District because we have worked on smoke management plans previously. And so we work very closely with staff to make sure that we are filling out all of their permit applications correctly and addressing all of their questions and concerns and supplying all the information that they need to do their job. So yeah, we anticipate working very closely with them on this as well. It would not be the first air curtain burning effort in the Bay Area. East Bay Regional Parks is doing that as well. And then with regard to eucalyptus allelopathy, that's absolutely right. There are some native plants and shrubs and very small trees in the understory here and there. And so we're hoping that removing some of the competition around them, the small diameter eucalyptus trees that we are hoping to remove, that will encourage those resilient individual plants and shrubs and trees to grow bigger where they are. So we'll be removing the duff, and then we'll see how much time it takes for the soils to recover.
Thank you.
More questions?
Question.
Barry, go ahead.
I have a comment, and I don't mean this to be a derogatory comment, but these reports have an overwhelming amount of detail and information, and it's not possible for us to process, how big a burn pile is and all these other things. What we like to hear, what I like to hear, are salient points of what we're doing, what it costs, how are the crew sizes doing, is the work being accomplished properly? I'm interested to know also the various ways of mitigating the work. But I would appreciate it if these reports could be reduced to salient points that we can all wrap our heads around and pay attention to. And I think overall it would bring a lot better results for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Barry. Any other questions? Fred?
Yeah, just a couple. You mentioned, I think, phase 1 and phase 2. Can you just go over what's in each phase and maybe just a rough breakdown of cost for each phase, if possible?
Yeah, so phase 1 is more about the scope and the diameter limit that we're really looking to achieve. There is a timeline associated with it. But what we're really looking to do in phase 1 is remove all of those smaller diameter trees. That's that 1 to 10 inch range. And then looking at the selective removal of those mid-range trees, which are 11 to 15 inches. We won't be removing any large diameter eucalyptus in phase 1. This is really focusing on those mid to smaller range. This is also where we're going to expand upon the Greater Ross Valley Shaded Fuel Break and the defensible space zones around both San Anselmo and San Rafael. And that's the primary goals of phase one. Phase two will be looking at what is still left on site and where we can still feasibly remove larger diameter eucalyptus trees to further mitigate the fire risk where it might be closer to homes or closer to access points where it would make sense to do so to help with responders' access as well to the open space. And in phase one, I mentioned one of the grants that we've already applied for. We are looking to secure $6 million plus a $1.5 million investment over the course of, I believe, 3 years. So that's the pot of money that we're looking at to achieve phase one.
Okay. And then does the project basically, would it start in Serinfeld and work its way towards San Anselmo?
No, we're not going to be working from top to bottom necessarily. We'll be focusing on that defensible space zone first, which is around the project. And then the individual treatment units and the sequence of that hasn't been decided yet.
Okay. And then, I just have a couple more. I went on the walking tour.
Okay.
And it seems like it's extremely steep slope.
Mhm.
How do you it seems like you couldn't be able to get equipment in there. Is that all manual? It just seems like it's a very tough area to deal with.
Yeah, so we're still able to use tracked equipment on appropriate slopes, sometimes up to 50%. They've got a lower pressure that reduces ground disturbance as well. So we will be able to reach out from the roads where the slopes allow, but we might have areas where we can't access just because of the access and slope. And those areas are being identified as well by our geologists out in the field. But there are limitations.
Okay. And then one last question on the herbicides. Are there restrictions, and I know it's targeted, but are there restrictions with placing it where it's in proximity to either private residences, trails, where people would be somewhat in, an immediate location to?
Yeah, we can apply it in both of those proximities, but the notification is what's really important. And we also try to apply herbicides in those areas when people are less likely to be there. So early in the morning, typically. But there's no strict regulations about avoiding those areas.
Okay, thanks.
There is just one other thing. There is a requirement that if you're placing, doesn't really apply here, but if you're placing herbicides under the CalVTP near waterways, wetlands, riparian areas, it has to be painted on. It can't be really sprayed. I mean, there's no aerial spraying anyway, but in very sensitive areas, you have to paint it on.
Questions, Stephen?
As someone who has a zero tolerance policy towards the Tasmanian mistake, it can't start soon enough or go far enough, in my opinion. But I want to clarify my understanding. So $6 million in grant money is being pursued. $1.5 million of MWPA money will be applied. Okay. Expected duration of phase one is how long?
We're looking at 1 to 3 years. The sooner the better. We know that this is a highly recreated area, and we don't want this to become an ongoing disturbance to recreationalists, to the residences and schools.
Would the $1.5 million of MWPA money get the project started while you pursue the grant money?
We already have $500,000 allocated from the Sandefeld Corps for this fiscal year.
Okay.
So we're hoping that's what will kick this off.
Okay. And then anecdotally, the birds come back, actually, in my experience. We took down 3 enormous eucalyptus in our backyard in Mill Valley over the last 20 years. And there's about a 2-year period where they readjust and return. And the red-tailed hawks are back, and it's beautiful. And there's no eucalyptus limbs falling through our house. So thank you very much. Great project, great presentation.
More questions? Gabe?
Thank you. I had 2 questions. One is about herbicides and the other is about public comment. On the herbicide, so we picked Garland for And I'm wondering, we're not using glyphosate, and also not all, of these herbicides are equal. Like some of them are more toxic. I think if you have an amine, it's not very toxic. If you put an ester, it's very toxic. So can you tell me a little bit about the toxicity of Garland 4?
Yeah, that's included in the response letter that MWPA presented, which I happen to have in front of me. I thought this might come up. Garland 4 is classified as a group D chemical, which is the lowest level, and it's not listed as a known carcinogen at this point by the EPA. And it's also being classified as slightly toxic or non-toxic. We understand those concerns, which is why we have some really good data about the half-life. Once we apply this herbicide, it doesn't remain on site forever. It does have a pretty quick half-life. Out in the open, when it's not into the vegetative matter, that can be as quickly as 2 to 5.6 hours on a sunny day with that photo degradation. But in the plant itself, we already know it's being drawn down into those roots. But the half-life in the vegetation ranges from 3 to 24 days. And if Anne has any more to say about that, be great too.
I guess just
No, you did great, Kate.
Just in summary, of all the poisons out there, we've picked the least poisonous.
Correct. We're looking for that that lowest toxicity. When we do have other options, we want to go with this if we can.
Okay. And then on the public comment question, how many people have complained, to MWPA, or, if to the Sierra Club, about this project in general, or about the herbicide specifically?
To my knowledge, and if you could expand on this, we've had the 2 formal complaints brought up for this meeting.
So a total of 2, not hundreds or more than
hundreds.
Okay. Thank you.
No, yeah, we've only received 2 comment letters communicating concerns about herbicide on this project. We've not been receiving public complaints for other projects either. So, and I don't know how many individuals have complained to the Sierra Club or have expressed any concerns there.
Thank you.
Alexis?
Hi, thank you. Great presentation. I do have a number of questions. Some are kind of follow-ups to some of the questions that have already been asked. And I'll just preface this by saying, obviously I'm here on behalf of San Anselmo. I've also lived in the Storage Park neighborhood for the past 7 years. I'm really familiar with this. And, prior to Measure C, it was like dinner table conversation of like, oh my gosh, this feels like a wicked problem. There's like all the cemetery and the county and San Rafael and San Anselmo, and like, it just, nobody has accountability to actually be stewards of the landscape. And now there's a group that has that task, which is really a great change. So some of my questions have to do with the kind of revegetation or the kind of planting after phase 2. The language in the report was really quite hypothetical, like, it may or if and blah, blah, blah. And so part of my, what I'm curious about is because it's going to be a huge aesthetic change, and it's a huge ecological shift, and it is a really recreational area. And it's part of our open space in some cases. What kind of assurance can I bring back to the community that there will be restoration and revegetation following the removal, and then also kind of relatedly, the grants that are being pursued, do they include, is funding for revegetation, native vegetation kind of part of that, or how does that fit in? Like, is it something, it doesn't, I'm not sure if it's something that MWPA would fund directly because of the scope, but just like, I want to just make sure that it's on a path to really happening to the extent that we can do that here today.
Yeah, so I also want to highlight again that we do have native vegetation still on site.
Yeah.
And so being able to really nurture and foster what's already there is a primary goal. I think there's more than we know about. If you looked at those photos, you've been on site, you can't see through it. I think there's a lot more kind of hidden within those groves than we know about. So number one is we want to nurture what's on site already. And we don't know everything to this point. Once we do an initial removal, we'll be able to still see what's there and be able to determine where restoration and planting specifically makes the most sense. Restoration can also just be the maintenance of what we've done. We're still restoring that to a eucalyptus-free site, which is also part of that scope. And I think I do want to highlight too, just from a restoration point, some of the examples that we've seen throughout the county and San Rafael specifically, up in China Camp State Park, where we've done a large scale eucalyptus removal. And you almost can't tell, with the exception of a couple large stumps still in place. There was a planting effort to restore a lot of the oaks there, but not that much. And that area has been able to recover naturally over the last 20 so years, almost on its own, and with the care of state parks as well. So our landscapes are more resilient than we realize sometimes.
Okay, thanks. That's helpful. Also to Barbara's question about the allelopathic, deterrence and that kind of stuff. The kind of second group of questions that I have has to do with the sort of scale of the project. So we, just and I know it might not be available right now, but we've heard, okay, it's thinning, but it's not clear cutting, and what is thinning, and it's there's the 15,000-ish that are in the 1 to 10, and so again, just trying to get a sense of what is it? Are we talking 0 to 25% removal of those 1 to 10 inch diameters, 25 to 50, 50 to 75, 75 to 99? What's the kind of intended scale of the thinning that is not clear cutting?
Yeah, so with a thinning, the definition of a thinning project is the removal of smaller diameter trees or shrubs, typically keeping the larger, more dominant overstory of a forest. So in this case, we're retaining the overstory of the really large eucalyptus, what we see up on top of the ridge, and retaining more that sparse overstory of those dominant trees throughout the stand. There will be about 15,000. That's kind of what our inventory has come up with of those trees within that 1 to 15 inch diameter range, which is the majority of the trees. It's typical we have a larger amount of smaller diameter, and we have a nice J curve as we go up in those diameter ranges. There's just going to be fewer larger trees. So the majority of the project is what we're looking to do, which is removal of those small trees.
Okay, so the goal is really as many small trees as possible.
Yes.
Okay, that's helpful context. Thank you. And then within that, I mean, do you anticipate, this is kind of going into the herbicide type questions, is that, every small tree that is removed has the stump painted, or is it, can some of them have stump grinding, or, are there other methods of removal? How does the kind of herbicide piece map onto the tree removal piece?
Yeah, so the herbicide versus a stump grinding and removal is actually less impactful and less invasive on the landscape. With a stump grinding, we're bringing in more equipment and creating more ground disturbance. With the herbicide, and that really targeted, it's a small amount, targeted on that outer cambium, the outer ring of the tree. Keeps the stump in place, keeps those roots in place. They degrade really slowly, and that's what you'll be able to see at China Camp. We still have stumps there, almost completely undegraded after 20 years. So keeping those in place is really crucial for the erosion control and the slope stability as well.
Okay, thank you. And then kind of second herbicide question has to do with the kind of foliar application for the broom. Can you just kind of walk through where, so, eucalyptus, that's a different beast than broom, and there's a lot of successful examples of broom removal that don't involve herbicide application. So can you just kind of walk us through the decision-making framework around when and why, herbicides would be used on broom in this project, you know, either foliar or if, I don't know if you paint for broom, but paint the stump, paint the whatever, not really the stump, but the whatever's left. And you know, just kind of helping elucidate why that would be kind of the treatment here, but it is not always the treatment for broom, whereas it might always be the preferred treatment for eucalyptus.
Yeah, I'm actually glad you brought up that question. That was my missed opportunity in the presentation to talk a little bit more about the herbicide treatments that we've already done on our projects, including a lot of broom. So over the last couple of years, we've really done a lot of trial and error in how to manage broom from a seasonality component, you know, making sure that we're taking into account the life cycle of that plant and the seed banks associated with that. And we've had a lot of success on our fire roads in the last couple months, actually, using what's called a thin line application. And this is it's non-foliar spray. We're not spraying, but we're applying with an applicator, Garland 4, directly to the base of the plant. And over the 2 to 4 weeks, we let that cure, we let that die, and it dries out. And then we've been coming in with a masticator from the road, or with hand crews at that point to remove kind of that older, really established broom, and that's been really effective. Following that, we've been, as the seeds come up, there's always a seed bank there that's really established. As those seedlings come up, we've been pulling, and it's manageable enough to use both of those methods, one time, maybe over the couple of years, depending on how it comes back. Intermittent herbicide application with other methods for a more holistic approach. So we have considered it. We've been doing a lot of trial and error, and for these really established, almost old growth broom that have been there for years, the initial herbicide application is a really good first step, followed by the removal and then the maintenance of those seedlings.
Thank you. And then why would that be more desirable from a kind of landscape manager's perspective than just kind of uprooting the larger, more mature broom?
They've got a pretty substantial root component. And when we get these really large plants, we can do a lot of soil disturbance on a larger scale if we're uprooting all of those. So again, with the eucalyptus, if we can keep those roots in place, that minimizes the soil disturbance and erosion control issues.
Okay.
If I can I just add to that sometimes on steep slopes, it's not desirable to pull large broom shrubs and dislodge the roots. So that slope is a consideration as well.
Okay, thank you. And then I think really just 2 more quick questions. One is around kind of stakeholder engagement. We have a really active open space committee who we haven't heard from, I think, in writing at all, but and then of course the Sierra Club. Was there outreach? I think you mentioned there was outreach to some groups. Can you just quickly run through who the outreach, which groups were kind of reached out to, and then also who's been able to engage, attend meetings, attend the site visits, that kind of thing?
I can start if that's helpful.
Yeah.
So the first meeting that we had, we reached out to Firewise communities. We reached out to all of the collaborators of the project, asked them who they would recommend, and they gave us several names of really engaged neighbors, Firewise community members, and so we reached out to them and hosted a meeting specifically for them. Then for the larger meeting that was just open to everybody in the public, we did our best really to try to reach any and all interested parties that we could. So I can come up with a list of the environmental folks who we reached out to. California Native Plant Society, Marin Conservation League, Ecologically Sound Practices Partnership, Marin Audubon, Sierra Club, but also anybody else who has expressed kind of like interest in the MWPA projects. We have a listserv and we send out information to. So we really did just try to make it as broad as possible. And we had about 65 people who showed up to that meeting, which may not sound like a lot, but it's comparable with the numbers that we got for some of the linear PSAs that we had. And those are much larger, and we had huge mailing lists there. So it really was an engaged community, I thought, comparatively. And having 40 people at our field trip was also a pretty large group. I'd say it's a lot of neighbors, but it's not only neighbors. You know, we also have members from the different environmental organizations who came. It's been, I think we've gotten a lot of interest, and a lot of people who, sort of like yourself, said this area has posed some risk for a while, and they were excited to hear about the project.
And we've also been posting sandwich board signs at trailheads around the area to make sure that anybody who's using the areas recreationally or otherwise are notified. So we spread it through our own listservs, our usual environmental organization partners, and encouraged everyone to spread the word.
Okay, thank you. And then I know like Sierra Club specifically has voiced some concerns, and have they been able to attend any of the sessions?
We've had one member of the Sierra Club attend various stakeholder meetings for I'm not sure how long, maybe a year or longer. The individual who has written 2 letters at this point has been invited to many meetings and field trips, but hasn't attended yet.
Okay, thank you.
More questions from the board? I know it's getting late. I have one brief question, and it's kind of touching on what you said, Mark, about the regional benefits of doing this project. I think initially we all think, oh, it's great for the homes that are adjacent. But looking at the letter that MWPA sent out yesterday, knowing that the spotting distance for eucalyptus is 18 to 22 miles, I'm just wondering if you could touch on the regional benefits of this kind of a project.
My nightmare for this project or this area is on an October 8th, 2017 type weather regime where the fire starts actually down in Mount Tam Cemetery. Even with a northeast wind coming, that fire is going to burn up the slope. It's going to be very dry. The wind will be sheltered in there. So it's going to allow that fire to burn up slope, create enough convection to get those embers or the leaves and the bark well into the convection column. And who knows where they're going to land with that distance range, but 3/4 of a mile would be not unheard of. And I'm kind of looking at the list of people here. Rich Shortall does remember an event when he was a child living up above San Anselmo where there was a fire in that area, and burning embers did from this project site did land right at the edge of the watershed.
Any more? I think we'll take public comment on this item right now. Martina.
And it does appear that we have at least one comment here in the room.
Oh, in person, Larry Minikis.
And I did just want to inform our attendees, both in the room and virtually online, that comments are restricted to 3 minutes of time. Those delivering a comment will receive a 30-second notification when you are 30 seconds away from the end of your time limit before the microphone will be turned off.
Great, and thank you. And I want to thank you for the presentation today. It was excellent. I'd also like to thank Anne and her team for their extensive response to the Sierra Club letter. And if you've not read it, including the public, I would highly recommend it. It's a lesson. If anything else, it will really teach you a lot about how we got here and where we're going. I'm speaking as in my role as secretary of the Marin Conservation League. And where I'd like to start is that there's discussion around MMWD in the Sierra Club letter at the very beginning, stating that they're not using it on their 22,000 acres. Why is the MWPA? Well, I can address that. And there was roughly 7 years of work at the watershed on this issue. late 90s to about, I think it was about 2005 when it was tabled. And it wasn't tabled by staff, it was tabled politically. There was a lot of discussion at the time. There was a lot of controversy about this. There was a lot of disagreement on this becoming a political issue at the time. So while it was tabled, it is certainly not a closed issue anywhere in this county. And I think that has to be made clear. I would like to also note that, well, what I'd like to do is actually just read into the minutes the MCL policy, and I'm just going to read brief parts. It's 3 pages long. I'm only going to read a little bit of it because it's late and I've only got 3 minutes. But the Marin Conservation, total, supports the use of integrated pest management to control or eradicate invasive plants in order to preserve and protect the biodiversity of native plant and animal communities in wildland and other open space areas, to protect human and natural communities from catastrophic wildfire, and to maintain healthy rangelands and pastures. IPM is a decision-making framework for controlling undesirable species known as pests. Pests can include all types of animal life, pathogens, and plants, including invasive non-native species. For managing invasive plants in open space lands, IPM provides a systematic method for determining which treatment methods or combination of methods will be effective in controlling the plants. May I have an extra minute? I can't. Well, in that case, I just want to thank you again, and we are in support of this project. Thank you.
Thank you, Larry. More public comment, Martina.
Do we have any additional comments in the room? Okay, so now we will take this to our attendees online, and I did just want to inform the attendees that comments are limited to 3 minutes in length. You will receive a 30-second notification prior to the end of your comment period. Looks like we have 4 comments online. The first comment will be from an Abby. Abby, you should be able to talk, and your time will begin as soon as you do.
Hi, thank you. And thank you for having this meeting. I was one of those people that did not know about the meetings until late August. And part of the reason why is because the meetings were all held during the summertime and during the time when school was getting ready to be back in session. I've submitted some comments. My understanding is that there's an active lawsuit challenging Cal VTP. So I think the board needs to pause and investigate that before moving forward with the decision tonight. I'm concerned about significant wildlife impacts that haven't been adequately addressed. I have seen project missteps in different fire prevention cases all across the county. And because I live in the town of San Anselmo, I'm very concerned about the environmental impact here. I'm also unclear about what's being asserted with regard to biochar. I'd also like to say that Larry Minikis is an official here with this organization, as well as a Marin Biomass Steering Committee member. And I don't think that we should be providing feedstock for a private biomass enterprise. I was very concerned that there was a 400-page addendum that hasn't been properly looked at or looked at thoroughly, and that it was sort of like thrown into the last minute. I think that we need bullet points for sure, but we also need access and easy access to be able to see it publicly. So I don't think that the project has been vetted properly. I think that we need to pause and have a community conversation within the town of San Anselmo. I acknowledge that eucalyptus are a pressing issue for a lot of us, but so is wildlife protection. And I do not want to wait 20 years for something to be restored. I've seen some of the restoration efforts, frankly, here and elsewhere, and they're insufficient for where we are today. I'm very concerned about the environment and the carbon releasing impacts of so many eucalyptus, 16,000 eucalyptus, I think, being taken down. So that's about the size of it. And lastly, I just want to say, since I have a little more time, pesticides will trickle down the hillside and into our creeks in San Anselmo. And if you take out all those trees, there's going to be a lot of water that'll come rushing down. So I think that, you know, we did a lot of homework.
Remaining.
Thank you. But we need to pause and take another look at this. Thank you.
Thank you, Abby.
This is Anne. I'm wondering if we might invite Sabrina to address the Cal VTP and the litigation.
Yeah, let's wait until all the public comment has taken place and then we'll get to that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so it looks like we have another comment by someone listed online as Creek Shade. Just to inform you that your comment is limited to 3 minutes, you will receive a 30-second notification toward the end of your comment period. Your time will begin as soon as you begin speaking, and you should be able to speak now. And that person who's listed as Creekside.
Can you hear me right now?
Yes.
Oh, thank you so much. My name is Maya Khosla, and I've worked in parks within Marin for several years and truly admire the idea of eucalyptus removal. I am an admirer of that. I know that parks have struggled with it. So I want to thank you. I know that you're trying to be really thoughtful about this. My concerns are, I'm actually really glad to hear that you've got these upslope standalone. Some of the trees are going to be left in place. I know that animals come back, and I know that there's a lot of use even within parks. Those heritage trees were being saved. So they just offer this incredible habitat. With survey after survey, we've seen that. So thanks so much for those considerations. I think what's missing, in my view, is a full life cycle analysis for true carbon accounting. What happens whether it's small or large, I think some community members have reported that large conifers are being removed or planned to be removed, or there's signs of removal. So I'm not sure if you could just actually put it in writing. Sounds like you're really discussing it thoroughly. If you just put it in writing that you've got that DBH limit, that'll be comfortable for people. Heavy operations tend to dry out soils, and the equipment I meant. So I'm just trying to this leads me back to full life cycle analysis with carbon accounting. Carbon loss is almost immediate from soil. So, the problem is that once you dry out the soil, it doesn't necessarily replenish itself immediately. And actually that can contribute to fires, emissions as well as fires. You've got that double whammy. I don't see any cumulative impacts of removal, chipping, and then what is the fate in transport? What's the fate? So that's something I want to see again, because if it's incineration or even partial biochar, biomass, whatever combination, we're still looking at emissions. So again, I'm missing the carbon accounting piece. Previous large fires affecting communities, we're seeing thinned areas actually burning really fast. And there's
30
just
seconds remaining.
30 seconds. Thank you. Yeah, so just take a look at the data on large wildfires burning through really heavily thinned areas. I think you need to take a little bit of, some data collection on that. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
And we have our next comment from Rich Shortall. Rich, you should be able to speak.
Great, thank you. First, speaking as president of the Sleepy Hollow Fire Protection District, which adjoins the property we're talking about here, and a longtime board member of the Ross Valley Fire Department, a retired firefighter, I consider this area for the works being proposed to be probably the most hazardous in all the Ross Valley. As Mark pointed out, when I was a kid, there was a fire there. Our home was near the top of Bald Hill, all the way across the valley, and burned material from that fire while it was active came all the way up to our house across the valley. Unfortunately, the nature of the size of the eucalyptus trees and all lend itself to that. So I think it's a very thoughtful project, and I'm very much in favor of doing it. The second thing, putting my Fire Safe Marin hat back on, I am really disappointed in the letter from the Sierra Club because it does not at all accurately reflect the position of fire safe Marin. On our website, we clearly identify that there are fire hazardous species, names such as eucalyptus, pines, firs, and many others. There's lots of articles about the flammability of those materials. And then the area that's being done here, one of the things that we speak a lot about, including in the article that they reference, is the importance of spacing on slopes. The steeper the slope, the farther apart the vegetation needs to be spaced. And so this is sloped area. This is a good maneuver. The material that's being removed is not the heritage larger trees. The material is the classic, really, ladder fuel material. Those pictures were really good. You can see all the debris that was at the bottom of the forest floor there from the shedding of the eucalyptus trees. The smaller ones that are being removed exactly qualify, which we strongly recommend across all of our website and always have the removal of ladder fuels. So this is a very thoughtful project. And in terms of eucalyptus itself, there's discussion of eucalyptus on our website where we'd say it is prone to fire and should be removed or requires significant maintenance, which is not practical in an area like this. The article that they were referring to really had to do with people's trees in their backyard, which is a completely different discussion. We're not in favor of removing trees just because they can burn. And that's why we think this is a sensible type of project, which is very reflective of the type of projects and the work that MWPA and the supporting agencies have been carrying out. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, it looks like our next comment is from a Pamela Meeks. Pamela, you should be able to speak.
Hey, good evening, everyone. Fabulous report. I mean, I think you got just about everything, Anne. So I really appreciate you being here tonight and whoever else is working on it. A couple little things kind of struck me. Kate, her comment on the project won't be feasible without herbicides. That kind of tweaked me. And I guess that needs to be educated more or a different way to say it. But that kind of set me back. And being a nurse, it set me back again. So I'd like to understand that more. And then secondly, I'm very happy you talked about the amount of trees and 15,000, at least the 1 to 15 inch diameter, because that gives me a bigger sense of the project and what it actually entails. And I'm curious, did you do any data work on restoring how the forest floor comes back and in time? And I'm assuming you're going to go back in and check to make sure that things are growing or coming back where, yeah. And then, and I think that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you. Martina, is that it?
And it looks like we have one more comment here from the person's listed as iPhone Orange. You should be able to speak. iPhone Orange.
Sorry, I just had to unmute. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so my name is Jean Harris, and I appreciate the presentation. I think it was very well done. I believe everything written on paper looks good, but in actual implication of it, I am the one neighbor to the eucalyptus removal at Rush Creek, and I can tell you what a disaster that has been. There was never a CEQA done, no EIR. The herbicides that were used literally have killed 2 very large eucalyptus that they plan on removing next week because they now call them to be in failure. And there's the entire project, as far as I'm concerned, in the hundreds of thousands of dollars spent from the taxpayers' money has been one huge fail. And it covers just about everything that everybody questioned today. Regrowth. I'm just actually so angry. It's really hard for me to express myself, but what I really need is like 3 hours, and I need someone's attention to really look at the project as what has occurred and what has happened. Because if this is telling of what is going to or possibly could happen between San Anselmo and San Rafael, I think you need to investigate it, and not as someone who is upset and disappointed with what has occurred, but what actually has occurred. And I have hundreds of photos to show the changes. And, you know, having lived here for 25 years with an entire forest of eucalyptus, I saw egrets would nest here, and a large number of owls, and now there's nothing. And I will be long gone before anything will grow back. And it's a shame. It's a crying shame. And I think it all started in error, with lack of proper supervision that started in open space and somehow managed to get involved with MWPA. And now I think it's just been one fail and one fail and a huge amount of money fail. And I would love to share this in detail with all my data and all my photos, if you're willing to listen, because I think this is an example of what not to do. And yes, it might look good on paper, but at the end of the day, it's not a good living space.
Thank you. Is that it, Martina?
If there are any additional attendees online who are wishing to speak on the current agenda item, please raise your hand in the reactions or press *9 to raise your hand if you're joining us by phone. And there are no additional comments.
Thank you. And do you want to have Sabrina address the resolved litigation on the Cal VTP?
Yes, please. Thanks, Sabrina, for joining.
Sure. Hi, good evening. So just last week, it's sort of timely, just last week on November 9th, the San Diego Superior Court heard the arguments on the merits of that challenge referenced by the commenter to the Cal VTP EIR that was brought by a chaparral support society in Southern California. And the court's tentative ruling a couple days before the hearing indicated that the court was inclined to deny the petition entirely. I tuned in and listened to the arguments, and at the conclusion of those arguments, the court indicated they would be making their tentative ruling, denying the petition, their final ruling. And so that is the final ruling of the court. The Cal VTP EIR has been upheld in its entirety. There is, of course, an opportunity for an appeal. The time for that has not started ticking yet. When the judgment is entered, there will be a 60-day period for an appeal if the petitioners wish to continue challenging the Cal VTP.
Thank you, Sabrina. Martina, is there one more public comment?
We do. It looks like we have a comment from OFA Marin. You should be able to speak at this time.
Yes, hi, this is Belle Cole with the Ecologically Sound Practices Partnership. And I don't know if this is the time to speak, but I'm going to do it because I don't know how much more time we have, but I'm not talking so much about the project, but I want to talk about the MWPA letter, which I commend. I think it's an excellent letter, as other people have said, on many fronts, and it reflects the discussions we have about the issues that we've raised, and reflects the discussions, especially about work plans and about Greater Lost Valley and Novato shaded fuel breaks. So it's really good. But on behalf of the partnership, I want to call attention to the references to one, the ESP practices, the best practices, and to the sections on climate and carbon and biomass utilization in the letter. And the one on climate, the climate emissions and sequestration in relationship to wildfire treatments is very well done. And it is related, and there's great documentation for future consideration. I just might be buried in there. You might not see it, but I want to call your attention to it. And it's associated with the Marin Biomass Project that yes, it'll be another year before the recommendations with respect to all the things about biomass utilization will be ready, but we'll be working with you, and appreciate all the materials that you've presented. But it will be about a year before we have the recommendations that you're looking for. So thanks for the great work on that letter.
Great. I think the board should discuss the issues to the extent necessary, and then we should go ahead and have a motion. Discussion, board? Yes, Dennis.
Yeah, thanks, Julie. I want to thank Kate, Emily, and Ann for the presentation. I do think this was a very thorough process that they did. And I am supportive of this project. It's really an important project. But I also want to recognize that there's a lot of eyes on us and the work we do. It's becoming apparent as we do more and more of this work. And so it's incumbent upon us to do the very best we can to make these projects what we predict they're going to be and what we expect them to be. And I'm confident that our staff and our team can do that. But I did want to recognize the criticism we're getting. I think people are concerned with herbicides and things. It makes people nervous, but to reach our goals that we need to reach, sometimes we have to use them as a last resort. And I'm supportive of those in this situation. So I just want to, I'd be willing to move this at some point, but look to the rest of the comments.
Kathy.
Thank you, Dennis. I agree with you wholeheartedly. And I as well appreciate the staff for a very, very complete presentation. I also appreciate all the pre-materials that we received. I read through it, and I appreciate our counsel for giving her input on it. So I felt like I was very aware of the project even before I walked in this room. I understood the concerns of Sierra Club. I saw the letter from Fern. I read it all, and I didn't really have any questions about it. Being a farmer's daughter, I'm very aware of controversy with fertilizers and herbicides, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm very supportive of this project. I think there's been some great questions that have been raised in this forum, but I would like to give my input to say that I'm ready to move that we approve this work and move on to our other agenda items. Thank you.
Is there a second?
Julie, can I just offer some quick comments? I know it's late, sorry.
It is late.
But I just wanted to kind of, echo the support and the appreciation for staff. I think with respect to herbicides, there is maybe a little bit more discussion we can have a further time about, when it's an appropriate tool versus an available tool, and just to elucidate a little more, like I might be I'm more on the side of soil disturbance for broom, no foliar application, and like that kind of piece in certain circumstances. And I just wanted to state that for the record, that I think we can always strive to be more and more targeted with use of poisons on the landscape. But in general, I think it's an important project. There's a lot of work and thoroughness, and I'm appreciative of the opportunity to kind of have this dialogue as a group. So thank you.
I just also want to comment from San Rafael as one of the lead agencies in such a critical area for San Rafael. Really appreciate all the work that Kate has done, and Anne, and everyone involved, Emily. I mean, so many people have been involved in this project. This is a big project, but I think to Supervisor Radoni's point, this is the work that we're set out to do. And if we need to move these type of big projects forward, because it really sets our foundation of us going forward. And when I went on the tour up there, and when you see the potential of fire and the potential of risk, there's no doubt in my mind we have to do something. And so I think it's a very important project for us to move forward.
Bruce Goins here. I want to commend the staff for the assessment that was done. Kate, for your presentation, the time that you spent here responding to all the questions that came in, Panorama and others. I think it's important that we do recognize that we did receive letters of support from the California Native Plant Society, and secondly, from the Fire and Environmental Resources Network, who have been critics of our projects before. These are environmentalists who understand wildfire prevention and what it is we're trying to do. I think it's critical that we understand that this is this is exceedingly well analyzed, and the principles and the practices here called integrated pest management is that you use the best, the easiest, the nicest treatment first, and then you use what's next and what's next and what's next. And we've come down here as this is a fraction of a percent of the landscape that we're dealing with. And we're dealing with a species that, if cut, as identified in a couple of letters, if cut and not treated, it will become ladder fuel again within just a handful of years, and it will burn up into the canopy. I think this is exceedingly well analyzed. We're using great discretion, and it is a difficult decision. But I can say I spent 2 days ago, I was in a conference, a statewide conference that reviewed wildfires here in California from 2018 to 2022. And that the fires 37% in the event of the inevitable ignition. What the data shows is that 37% of the fire landscape is burning at high intensity, and we're getting landscapes of 10,000 acres and more that are dead and done. And what we're talking about here is very targeted treatment in very small acreage to prevent, in the event of the inevitable ignition, we're going to get a fire like a 4-inch flame length that can be taken on by firefighters. I support this work. I think it's difficult, but this is indeed wildfire prevention, and we use all of the tools in the integrated pest management workshop toolbox. And so I'm in support of this all, and I thank everyone for your analysis.
Yeah, I just want to say that it is a careful balance to use herbicides, but we are following the Cal VTP. We aren't going off on a limb here. And if we don't use herbicides, we're really throwing taxpayer money away, because we're going to be right back where we were in 3 to 4 years when everything is growing back. So I think were we not to use herbicides, the taxpayers wouldn't like us. So we're kind of in a weird position where we need to preserve our investment, be respectful of the environment, follow the Cal VTP and IPM, which we're doing. So if there's no further discussion, I think we should, Kathy made the motion, Barry seconded. I think we should vote. You want to call the roll, Martina, before people have to leave?
And that was, can we just state for the record who made the motion in the second?
Yes, Kathy made the motion and Barry seconded.
Okay, and so that is a motion by Director Donahue with a second by Director Evergettis. Starting with Director Molesworth for Bolinas.
Aye.
Director Burke for Mill Valley. Oh, Director Burke had to leave early. Director Kurtz for the City of San Rafael.
Aye.
Director Paulson for the City of Larkspur also had to leave early. Director Rodoni for the County of Marin.
Aye.
Director Donahue for Inverness.
Aye.
Director Evergettis for Kentfield.
Aye.
Director Shea for Marinewood.
Aye.
Director Murray for Muir Beach.
Aye.
Director Goins for Novato.
Aye.
Director Finn for Sleepy Hollow.
Aye.
Director White for Stinson Beach. And Director Hilliard is not with us. Director Casisa for Corte Madera.
Aye.
Director McMillan, for Director Kohler for Fairfax.
Aye.
Director Feynman for San Anselmo.
Aye.
and Director McMillan, President McMillan for Ross.
Aye.
And that is a unanimous vote of all in attendance.
Next we have item 8B, which is the Citizens Oversight Committee report. Mark, I'm worried that it's getting to be so late. I'm wondering if we should move this to January.
Completely your judgment.
I think we should move it. How do people feel about moving it?
I would,
Okay.
well, also I know Pat was here, but I would also I would like not to disrespect the COC's time and rush through
I
their
agree.
hard work.
Yeah, no, it deserves some time and careful thought and discussion. Okay, so, and then the staff reports, can we also move the staff reports to January?
We can, however, I think the staff reports do speak for themselves.
Okay. All right. Number 10, we eliminated. So number 11, board members' request regarding future agenda items. Anybody?
All that staff will offer is, we are canceling the exec committee and board meeting for December.
Yes.
Julie, just interruption. Do you need a motion to move item 8B, the Citizens Oversight Committee, to January meeting?
Oh, yes. Thank you, Barbara.
I'm moving that.
Thank you, Barbara. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Fred
Okay.
seconded.
And we now need to go to a vote. Director Molesworth?
Aye.
Director Burke? Director Kurtz?
Aye.
Director Paulson is not here. Director Rodoni also left. Director Donahue?
Aye.
Director Evergettis? Director
Aye.
Director Shea?
Aye.
Director Murray?
Aye.
Director Goins?
Aye.
Director Finn? Director White? No. Director Casissa?
Aye.
Director Kohler?
Aye.
Director Feynman?
Aye.
President McMillan? Okay, so that's a unanimous vote of all in attendance too.
I hope everyone has a lovely Thanksgiving and good holidays in December, and we'll see you in January. Thank you.
Same to you.